So thank you very much for inviting me to this conference. And thank you to Professor Wintersteiner for his kindness and beautiful French. Thank you to Julia for very kind messages and nice organization. The title of my paper today is the title of my thesis, Towards a Critical Theory of the Anthropocene and Life-affirming Politics, that I obtained in 2018 from Queen's University under the supervision of John Berry. This thesis located itself in the field of green political theory and provides a critical account of the way the environmental crisis is currently addressed in dominant Anthropocene narratives and neoliberal capitalist growth-based institutions. It describes how to shift from arrogant anthropocentrism and unsustainable materialistic lifestyles to a post-anthropocentric and post-capitalist ecological humanism, focusing on the good life within ecological limits. This thesis, as you said, has given birth to a book published in 2019 by Palgrave Macmillan and Untitled After the Anthropocene, Green Republicanism in a Post-Capitalist World. In this book, I defend a constitutional green republicanism whose institutions support human and non-human flourishing against current dominating and alienating practices and institutions. Indeed, as you can read on the slide, the neoliberal consumer dream for individuals has turned into the decline of commons for the whole, and calls, therefore, for renewed political institutions that preserve the public good and conducted by ideals of living together, sharing, caring, and protecting the social and natural components of life. The new ecological civilization will consider all living beings as an interdependent community of members led by the same history, which is the history of planet Earth, and support the flourishing of non-human and human life. Of course, in the current situation of a capitalism of disasters and of an authoritarian neoliberalism that push human civilization and life on Earth in general toward a precipice, those renewed institutions seem difficult to reach. But humanists need to gather their forces and courage against the neo-modernist and transhumanist projects that currently lie at the heart of global governance, as we see today through the COVID crisis. On the contrary to the current attempts to perpetuate a system that destroys life and puts at risk human civilization through relentless technical innovation and capitalist investment, we need to admit, as Brand and Vicent say, that the key, as it's written here, to the overcoming of the ecological crisis is neither the market nor technological innovation, but the struggle against social power and domination. Indeed, what is needed is not more technological innovation, but more politics and more social innovations. This means that the great challenge that lies ahead of us is not the further humanization or reconstruction of the planet according to economic needs for further capitalist opportunities, nor its mastery through geoengineering and geoconstructivism, but rather the further humanization of humanity and the mastery of our mastery. We need indeed more justice, more sharing, more conviviality and flourishing, more meaningful ways of living rather than new technical objects that contribute to alienating us more and more. As you can already foresee, my work promotes a degrowth, post-growth agenda, a downshifting paradigm that counters neoliberal values such as hyper-consumerism, individualism, materialism, accumulation of profit, competition, cult of performance, etc. The green republicanism I contend comprises two different aspects. One which offers a comprehensive analysis of the current situation and a radical critique of the dominating, alienating practices of contemporary capitalist societies, and another aspect which is reconstructive and normative, and which answers the question, fundamental question for political philosophy: what is a good life? It is this latter that specifically defines green republicanism. First of all, let's have a look at the critical aspect of my work. In the wake of critical theory, especially the first generation of the Frankfurt School, Green Republicanism establishes a radical critique of the social and political practices of contemporary capitalist societies. In the lines of Moore, it argues that the Anthropocene is not the geology of a species, but rather the geology of a system of power, profit, and reproduction, namely capitalism. In the Capitalocene, the domination of nature is entangled with the domination of humans. All what is done to nature, and especially to animals, is eventually done to humans. The objectification and reification of nature morally and ontologically entail the objectification and reification of humans. We can see this through the use of QR codes for social life, which were formerly used or invented to reference loose objects, or through the expression human resources or human capital. In the same way that we have considered nature as an object, we consider humans who are not only apart from nature, but also a part of nature as objects. This is an idea that I particularly developed in a presentation at the Leipzig Degrowth Conference in 2014, where I showed the common points between early critical theory and the degrowth movement. The process of objectification that they both denounce lies at the heart of current social and ecological unsustainability. As shown by Marcuse, Horkheimer, and Adorno, the use of instrumental rationality turns against humans themselves. By generating values which are exclusively based on instrumental and economic reason, humanity ends up being itself caught in the trap of the very reductionist rationality that turns everything, humanity herself, into assets. Even if scientists have not yet given their approval, some claim that we have entered a new geological era called the Anthropocene, or the age of humans. This concept was initially launched by Crutzen and Stormer to warn against the destructive power of humanity on nature. But this buzzword, we have to admit now, has become an opportunity to justify further environmental destruction. In that respect, my proposed green republicanism opposes current dominant narrative of the good Anthropocene as being an age of great opportunity. I'm referring here to eco-modernists such as Ellis, Nardos, and Schellenberger from the Breakthrough Institute, techno-optimist Earth system scientists such as Crutzen or Steffen, and techno-postmoderns such as Bruno Latour or Donna Haraway. Eco-modernists especially offer a very optimistic version of the Anthropocene where technology coupled with capitalist investment shall save the planet. First of all, as shows the first quote here, we will be proud of the planet we create in the Anthropocene, from Ellis, member of the Breakthrough Institute. The term itself, Anthropocene, celebrates a radical and arrogant anthropocentrism. It valorizes human agency and the desire to gain mastery over nature. And it does that at a time when we need to acknowledge our own ignorance and the complexity of natural ecosystem and their interdependency. It celebrates a strong anthropocentrism at a time when our own current technological power is not at all mastered, as showed very well Ulrich Beck in his various works. In other words, the word itself, Anthropocene, contributes to the problem it is supposed to address. We see this Prometheanism particularly present in the second quote from Crutzen and Schwegel. The Anthropocene outlines the immense power of, I don't have it, I'm sorry, because you are in front of me, I have to take this away, of our intellect and our creativity and the opportunities they offer for shaping the future. Or in the last quote, nature no longer runs the earth, we do, it's our choice what happens here, from Linus. Second point, the proponents and advocates of the techno-Anthropocene, especially eco-constructivists such as Bruno Latour and or Donna Haraway, followed by eco-modernists and transgressive hype theorists such as Tim Morton, use this concept to evacuate nature in favor of a so-called mesh, hybridist, or social natural compound. Nature and culture are not any longer separated like it was during modernity, but they are mixed in a new compound that they call techno-nature. What results from that is not the defense of nature, but rather the glorification of technology. the technosphere has encapsulated the biosphere. It is an anti-Spinozist position. Here, nothing is nature anymore. Everything is technology. This explains the end of nature narrative, very dear to post-environmentalists. By declaring that everything is human-constructed or that nature is dead, post-environmentalists intend to neutralize green traditional discourses on environmental limits and legitimate by doing so further destruction and artificialization of Earth. If nature does not exist, everything is possible and the planet can be reshaped according to our wishes, or more exactly, according to capitalist need markets. Third point, and aside from ontological implications, the Anthropocene concept offers an apolitical and historical account of the ecological crisis by designating an undifferentiated anthropos responsible for the large-scale changes that take us outside of the stable Holocene. It depoliticizes the debates to turn them into an exclusive technical question limited only to the experts. This is why the term capitalocene is preferable. It shows that nature is not simply destroyed, but has been destroyed and is being destroyed by intentional and productive forces to serve the consumerist system. In brief, post-environmentalists, eco-modernists and postmodernists leave us with an ecology without nature and without politics. They promote anti-democratic and technocratic regimes and give precedence to the current capitalistic management of nature and its associated catastrophes. Let us dive a bit deeper into the strategy of post-environmentalism. We must love our monsters. In this article written for the Breakthrough Journal, Bruno Latour urges us to love the consequences of our technologies, whatever they are, as much as we love our own children. Rising temperatures, nuclear waste, species extinction, pollution, radioactivity, etc. All that are nature cultures, our own creations that we need to accept as part of our postmodern reality. This also applies to Haraway's Oncomouse, this mouse with a human ear, and other monsters created by Strangelove doctors and other sorcerers' appetencies. The aim with this postmodernism is this version of techno-postmodernism is not any longer to destroy the otherness of nature, like in traditional modernism, but to contend that there is no otherness anymore. This postmodern reasoning and the new anti-naturalist strategy that goes with it are trapped into affirmative thinking, because according to this doctrine, only sociocultural arrangements exist. It is also trapped into a straw man, because in their thinking, nature is whether pristine or is not. It's a black and white reasoning. It denies as well the non-identity of nature and the fact that nature can never be encapsulated in concept without consequences. And these consequences are the disaster we see now, what we can call the revolt or the return of nature in the Anthropocene. The consequences of such an ideology for the planet are dramatic. They lead to the glorification of smart cities, connected objects, electric cars, and not the least, geoengineering, climate adaptive biotechnologies, that is human genetic engineering, to manage the ecological crisis. Mega and hyper-centralized technologies such as geoengineering with potential disastrous consequences, nuclear power, fracking, sustain all of them and prolong the power of technocracy and experts versus democratic institutions and citizen empowerment. The techno-market answer to the ecological crisis also implies the extension of environmental financialization. We can summarize this process under the concept of neoliberal natures. This means solutions such as that we all know, such as pricing pollution, creating green financial markets, or assigning monetary values to ecosystems. All that in order to ensure the continuation of capitalist growth-oriented economic systems, business as usual solutions. If nature has been reified during modernity, eco-modernism, which is a mix of green capitalism and postmodern hybridist ontology, is pushing these logics of reification and commodification to the limits. As nothing escapes the realm of human technology and economy, as nothing anymore is sacred, everything can be sold and bought. The history of ecosystems destruction goes indeed hand in hand with the development of this predatory capitalism. Indeed, as I already said before, the Anthropocene is not so much the geology of the species as the geology of the capitalist, capitalist accumulation, privileged resource consumption for a minority, differentiated and extremely unevenly distributed negative environmental impact. The Capitalocene raises issues of global environmental justice, uneven distribution of wealth and accountability. It thus calls for further socioeconomic analysis explaining the historical processes that led to the predicament. This task requires more interdisciplinary research, more human and social research, and especially the involvement of social sciences and humanity to critically assess the dominant narrative of the good Anthropocene. A critical theory must not only develop a critique of existing social conditions of domination, it must also carry the potential for a radical transformation of societies. As defined by Axel Honneth, any critical theory must consist of two fundamental elements: a comprehensive theory of society that reveals an emancipatory need, and a transcending dimension that provides a normative horizon, what Honneth defines as transcendence within immanence. This second aspect constitutes the constructive aspect of the green republicanism I contend. This part of the theory can be defined as practical idealism or realist utopianism. It offers institutional arrangements that preserve the common good and secure individual freedom in an ecologically constrained and finite world. Nothing is more foreign to green republicanism than the neoliberal and techno-optimist business as usual scenario implemented by neoliberal institutions and neoliberal states. It especially takes into account what has been forsaken by neoliberal society. That is the very fragile aspect and dimensions of life. Green republicanism takes as a starting point the fact that vulnerability, fragility, limits, and dependence are ineliminable parts of human existence. This new green republicanism combines two strands of republicanism. In a Hegelian term, it would be an Aufhebung of liberalism and traditional republicanism. It combines the neo-Athenian version, where liberty is understood as participation in the public and political life. This means it promotes active citizenship and direct democracy. And the Roman version, where political legal constitutionalism is necessary as a barrier against factions, demagoguery, and tyranny. By combining these two strands of republicanism, green republicanism plays on two forms of political institution: direct democracy, wherever it is possible, according to constraints of size and feasibility, and constitutionalism to safeguard democracy against anti-democratic drifts, including among the state itself, as we are seeing at the moment in France. Especially, green republicanism is a fusion of insights from the civic republican political tradition with a focus on freedom as non-domination, as opposed to the liberal capitalist reading of freedom as non-interference, and the implementation of enforceable rights and concrete forms of existential security. That is a main difference with Petit's neo-republicanism. It focuses on the struggle against concrete socioeconomic inequality. It emphasizes the centrality of active citizenship and contestation, defending an agonistic democracy against politics viewed only as consensus. It shows the importance of realizing the condition for flourishing for all life, human and non-human. It defends, therefore, a post-anthropocentric view based on wild law and earth jurisprudence. It underlines the necessity to deepen democratization beyond the formal political sphere in order to increase the citizen voice, including in the workplace. The Republican conception of autonomy opposes the consumer freedom of market-oriented liberal democracies. It is also where green republicanism goes further than the neo-republicanism found, for instance, in Philippe Petit's work, which omits to focus on the economic structural features on inequality. In this sense, green republicanism is closer to the socialist republicanism of Richard Dagger or Stuart White than to liberal conceptions of republicanism. This political doctrine will focus on providing people with economic, social, and ecological security. That is, with fundamental goods belonging to health, work, education, dwelling, information, social production, and ecological services, which are necessary for every individual to feel a sense of existential security, freedom, and well-being. Besides institutional changes, there is today a compelling need to implement vast cultural changes and to shift from a consumer culture to a culture of emancipation. This is why we need to foster the decolonization of the mind, in Serge Latouche's words, through new forms of aesthetics, education, and arts, decorrelated from markets, through the democratization of politics, through the vulgarization of post-normal science that acknowledges, in the wake of Edgar Morin, the complexity of socio-nature relationships and the uncertainties that go with it. It will promote the development of soft technologies that give people autonomy, on the contrary to centralized mega machines. It will work on the decommodification of the world through the banishment of ads in public places and the fostering of strong social services. It will give room in education to the question of senses and sensibility, instead of developing only rational quantitative tools measuring performances and competencies. Green republicanism and radical green environmental politics have a lot in common. They are both a politic of the common good. They elevate the interest of communities above private affairs and encourage collective forms of self-government. They are both critical of capitalist growth-based institutions that have inegalitarian and unsustainable implications, involve corruption, the corruption and the corrosion of the public realm, and the monopolization of the social, economic, and political power by a minority, such as experts and lobbies. They are also critical of the way hyper-consumerism negatively impacts citizen civic characters, and again, emphasizes the necessity to decolonize the imaginary, as mentioned before. They see limitless growth economies as fostering excessive consumption, privatism, and inequality, undermining by doing so social ties and destroying the environment. Republican and radical green theorists are devoted to supporting and prioritizing the community's common good. In summary, as says Canavo, republicanism and radical green politics theory are fairly suspicious of capitalism. Both republicanism and green theory emphasize the need for stable and sustainable community that stands the test of time against current short-sighted, high-consumer societies. They emphasize the necessity to build socio-ecological resilient societies emancipated from market, arbitrary domination, and power. They particularly value, especially the Aristotelian strand of republicanism, participatory democracy and decentralization to achieve the goal of civic participation and local empowerment. They both intend to give a politic voice to local communities, granting particular importance to social and ecological bonds, attachments to places and to environmental education. Lastly, these two political strands of thought favor the development of civic, green, and republican virtues, that is, a certain type of citizenship and public culture that includes in Canavo's words, a sense of place, an appreciation of ecological complexity and interdependence, caution and humility, care and respect, flexibility, courage, resilience, creativity, and a sense of collective responsibility in order to create a more sustainable and politically engaged society. Referring to Dreiseg's terminology in the Politics of Earth, green republicanism can be considered as a radical green political theory, which intends not only to change social and institutional structures, but also to bring about a consciousness change away from capitalist and hyper consumption conditioning and from growth ideology. These new forms of conduct are more needed if we want to address the ecological and social predicament and the current demoralization of the individuals brought about by the neoliberal irrational rationality, to take Foucault's words. This latter has created antisocial and unsustainable myths, such as the myth of growth or the adulation of the winner type, the disregard of emotion and feelings, or the praising of individual success against the well-being of communities. Green republicanism particularly opposes the reformist business as usual managerial approach offered by neo-Greens, eco-modernists or eco-pragmatists. It offers a post-capitalist, post-growth, post-neoliberal and post-anthropocentric account of green political theorizing. The support for such proposal in the context of current illiberal democracies can only come from a progressive shift in the collective culture and the undermining of neoliberal culture by enlightened individuals, contestatory association and movements such as grassroots movement or labor organization, and by citizen empowerment. I don't talk anymore about political parties. Maybe we will talk about it later in correlation with the COVID crisis. Indeed, as we can see, after decades of deterioration of our terre patrie, not followed by any suitable action, neoliberal states and institutions obviously do not want to make the change. On the contrary, following the logic of disaster capitalism and shock doctrine, I use the word, the expression of Naomi Klein's recent book, 2007 books. Using this capitalism disaster and shock doctrine, they seem to make sure that things go worse in order to be able to implement their authoritarian and highly technocratic capitalistic agenda. It was without counting on a new opportunity that was offered to them, namely the COVID crisis. We should not forget indeed that Klaus Schwab, the director and founder of the World Economic Forum, initially wanted to use the ecological crisis to implement what he calls the Great Reset. For the future of our planet and the future of humanity, we must therefore unify our forces across borders to implement the revolution of peoples against their elites. And I repeat, the revolution of people against their elites at national and global levels. Trade unions, environmental movements, non-corrupt political parties, spiritual and religious congregations, organizations, associations, etc., which are interested in the future of the planet, could join us. Our movement, the Green Republican movement, which is starting today, our movement of the movement, will not show any excess, but instead will defend a good dose of humility, caution, care, compassion, decency, civility, solidarity, community, and creativity. Welcome, therefore, into the new world that we have decided to create on our own without relying on our current institution for the future of our children and all livings on Earth. Thank you very much for your attention.